The wind swept dust through the narrow streets of Red Hollow, rattling saloon doors and carrying whispers faster than any horse. Celine Moreau stood at the hitching post outside the sheriff's office, her gloved hands steady despite the long ride from Amarillo. Men stared, they always did. A woman bounty hunter was still a novelty in most corners of the West. Inside, Sheriff Dalton slid a folded poster across his desk. The paper was creased and smudged, but the face sketched in charcoal was unmistakable: sharp jaw, unruly dark hair, and eyes that seemed almost amused. Cain Mercer, Dalton said, wanted for train robbery, cattle theft, and obstruction of federal law. $500, dead or alive. Celine studied the drawing. What's he really wanted for? Dalton hesitated. You ask too many questions. I asked the right ones. The sheriff leaned back. Officially, he's the man who's been robbing supply wagons headed for the mining company up north. Unofficially, some folks claim he's been giving those supplies to settlers who can't afford winter stores. Celine folded the poster and slipped it into her coat. You don't sound convinced he's a villain. Dalton's jaw tightened. I sound like a man who answers to men richer than both of us. Bring him in. That's all that matters. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across Red Hollow. Celine mounted her horse and rode toward the northern hills where Cain Mercer was said to hide. She'd chased thieves before, men who deserved the rope waiting for them. But something about this one felt different. 2 days later, she found the first sign of him. A burned wagon lay abandoned in a narrow canyon. But instead of bodies, she found sacks of flour and crates of medicine hidden beneath tarps, untouched. Fresh tracks led away from the sign boot prints, and horse hooves heading east. Celine dismounted, crouching beside the prints. You're careful, she murmured. Too careful for a reckless outlaw. A rifle cocked behind her. You're trespassing, miss. Celine didn't flinch. Slowly, she raised her hands and turned. Cain Mercer stood 10 paces away, his revolver steady. He looked younger than she expected. Not soft, there was steel in his stance, but not hardened, like most criminals she'd known. Cain Mercer, she said calmly. $500 looks good on you. A corner of his mouth lifted. That's so, and what do I look like to you? Trouble, he chuckled. That's honest, at least. His eyes flicked to the hidden supplies, then back to her. You going to shoot me, or are we going to talk? Celine studied him. His clothes were worn but clean. No sign of stolen finery. No blood on his hands. Talk, she said. Cain lowered his gun slightly. Those supplies were bound for the Grayson Mining Company. They've been forcing settlers off their land, cutting off food shipments if they don't sell cheap. Celine's brow furrowed. That's not what the posters say. Posters are written by men who can afford ink. She should have pulled her weapon. Should have ended it there. Instead, she asked, why not clear your name? Cain's gaze hardened. Because men like Grayson don't lose. A distant whistle echoed through the canyon, 3 short bursts. Cain's head snapped toward the sound. You're not the only one hunting me. Before she could respond, gunfire erupted from the ridge above. Celine dove for cover as bullets struck the rocks around them. Cain grabbed her arm and pulled her behind the burned wagon. Those aren't settlers, he said grimly. That's Grayson's private men. Celine drew her revolver, heart pounding. She had come to capture an outlaw. Instead, she found herself fighting at his side. Gunfire echoed through the canyon, sharp and merciless. Dust exploded from the rocks around Celine as another bullet struck inches from her head. 2 on the ridge, she called, peering over the edge of the burned wagon. Maybe 3. Cain nodded. They're flankers. Grayson's men like to box their prey in. You speak from experience. I've been boxed before. Another shot rang out. Celine leaned out, fired once, and heard a grunt, followed by scrambling stones. One silhouette disappeared from the ridge. 2 now, she said. Cain moved faster than she expected. He darted to a boulder 20 feet away, drawing fire toward himself. Celine used the distraction, firing again. A second man toppled backward. The third rider cursed loudly, then retreated. Silence settled over the canyon, except for the fading thunder of hooves. Celine lowered her revolver slowly. They weren't aiming to arrest you. Cain walked back toward, her jaw tight. No, they were aiming to bury me. She watched him carefully. You could have run while they focused on me and leave you to die. He shook his head. I don't leave people behind. There was no arrogance in his tone, only simple truth. Celine holstered her weapon. If Grayson's sending private gunmen, this bounty isn't about justice. It never was, Cain replied. He wants the settlers scared. I've been escorting families out of disputed land before his men can burn them out. Celine folded her arms. That's not cattle theft. No, Cain said. It's protection. She glanced at the hidden crates again. Medicine, flour, blankets. If what you're saying is true, why hasn't anyone spoken up? They're afraid, Cain said quietly. Grayson owns the mine, the rail contract, half the town council. You stand against him, you lose your livelihood. Celine thought of Sheriff Dalton's hesitation, the way he avoided her eyes. I need proof, she said firmly. If I'm risking my neck for you, I need more than stories. Cain studied her for a long moment. There's a settlement east of here. Widow Parker and her boys. Grayson's men were supposed to force them off last week. I stopped it. Take me there. They rode under the fading sun, keeping two narrow trails. Celine noticed how Cain constantly scanned the horizon, not paranoid, just prepared. You always ride alone? He asked. Usually. That's dangerous. She gave him a sidelong glance. So is trusting strangers. He smiled faintly. Fair point. By nightfall, lantern lights flickered in a small clearing. Rough cabins stood clustered near a shallow creek. Children ran between them, laughter breaking the quiet. A woman stepped forward as they approached. Her face was tired but kind. Cain, she breathed in relief. He dismounted. Evening, Mrs. Parker. Everything steady, for now, thanks to you. Celine watched the exchange closely. Mrs. Parker's eyes shifted to her. You, a friend of his? Something like that, Celine replied carefully. Mrs. Parker stepped closer. If you're hunting him, you'd best know he's the only reason we still have roofs over our heads. Celine felt the weight of those words. Cain avoided her gaze. Inside one of the cabins, she saw crates marked with the Grayson Mining Company seal. Supplies clearly redirected. You stole these, she said quietly. I reclaimed them, Cain corrected. Grayson withholds shipments to pressure families into selling. And you think this ends well? It ends better than doing nothing. Outside, a small boy approached Cain shyly. You gonna teach me how to shoot, like you promised? Cain knelt to his level. Soon, but only to protect, not to harm. Understand? The boy nodded seriously. Celine felt something shift inside her. Outlaws didn't kneel to children and speak of restraint. Later, as the settlement slept, she stood by the creek. You could turn yourself in, she said softly. Tell your side. Cain joined her, and let Grayson bury the truth. I wouldn't make it to trial. The moon reflected in the water between them. You still planning to collect that bounty? He asked. Celine didn't answer right away. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure which side of the law she stood on. And somewhere beyond the hills, Grayson's men were regrouping. This wasn't over. Morning broke over the settlement in a wash of pale gold. Roosters crowed, smoke curled from cabin chimneys, and for a brief moment, the world felt peaceful. Celine stood outside Widow Parker's cabin, watching Cain repair a broken fence post with two of the boys. He worked without complaint, sleeves rolled up, laughing softly, when the younger child struggled to hold a hammer steady. This was not the man from the wanted poster. She turned as hoofbeats approached from the south trail. 3 riders. Cain saw them too. His posture changed instantly, his warmth replaced by alert stillness. Inside, he murmured to the boys. Celine stepped forward, resting her hand near her revolver, but not drawing. The riders wore dark coats and identical badges pinned to their lapels, the insignia of the Grayson Mining Company. At their center rode A tall, sharp-featured man with slicked-back hair and an expression carved from contempt. "Well," he called lazily, "if it isn't the hero of the hills." Cain didn't respond. The man's gaze shifted to Celine. "And you must be the bounty hunter. I heard Red Hollow hired one. I work for whoever pays." Celine replied evenly. The man smirked. "Name's Victor Hale. I represent Mr. Grayson." "Then represent him quickly," Cain said. "These folks have work to do." Hale dismounted slowly. "Actually, I've come to finalize eviction." Mrs. Parker stepped forward, pale but steady. "We paid our dues." Phil produced a folded document. "Your land lease expired last month. The mine requires expansion." "That's a lie," Cain snapped. "The lease runs another year." Hale's eyes glittered. "Not after this morning." He handed the paper to Celine. She scanned it quickly. "Fresh ink, fresh signature." "You're too fresh. You forged this," she said quietly. Hale's smile vanished. "Careful." Celine stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You sent gunmen after him yesterday." Hale's gaze hardened. "Mr. Mercer is a criminal interfering with corporate operations. He's protecting families. He's stealing." Cain moved beside her. "You burn crops. You poison wells. Call that corporate." Hale's patience thinned. "This land sits on silver. You think sentiment outranks profit." The settlers murmured nervously. Celine looked from Hale to Canand, then to the frightened faces behind them. "Much?" she asked suddenly. Hale blinked. "Excuse me." "The bounty," she said. 500, dead or alive." Hale smiled slowly. "You bring him in, you'll get paid, and if I bring you proof of a legal eviction." His smile faded again. "You won't." Silence stretched. Celine folded the forged document carefully and tucked it into her coat. "I think I just did." Hale's jaw tightened. "Be very careful who you cross, Miss Celine." "Miss Celine," he finished coldly. "Grayson does not lose." Cain's voice was steady beside her. "Neither do we." Hale mounted his horse. "You have 48 hours. Then we clear this land." The riders turned and disappeared down the trail. The moment they were gone, tension collapsed into fearful whispers. Celine faced Cain. 48 hours isn't much. "It's enough," he said. "If we move first." She studied him. "You have a plan." "I always do, and it usually involves you risking your neck." He gave a small, crooked smile. "Comes with the job." She hesitated. "Why keep fighting? You could ride south. Start over." Cain's expression softened. "Because someone once fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. Instead, she extended her hand. "Then we expose Grayson." Cain looked at her hand, surprised. "You're choosing a side?" he asked quietly. Celine met his gaze. "I always do." He clasped her hand firmly. For the first time, they weren't hunter and hunted. They were partners. And in 48 hours, the real battle would begin. They rode before dawn. Cain led Celine through a narrow pass that cut between jagged cliffs, a hidden trail few riders knew. The air was cold, sharp, with the scent of sagebrush and distant smoke from the mining camps. "Grayson keeps records," Cain said, as they rode. "Contracts, land deeds, shipment logs. If we get those, we prove he's been manipulating leases." "And where does he keep them?" Celine asked. "In his office, at the North Mine. 2nd floor, locked cabinet." "You've been inside." "Once, and Cain's mouth tightened. Didn't get far. By mid-morning, the mine came into view, a sprawling operation carved into the hillside. Smoke poured from tall stacks. Workers moved like ants below, guarded by armed men stationed along the perimeter. Celine studied the layout carefully. "Too many at the front gate. There's a supply entrance in back," Cain said. "Less guarded." They dismounted behind a ridge and tied their horses. "Once we're in," Celine said, checking her revolver, "we move quiet. No unnecessary gunfire." Cain smirked faintly. "You say that like I enjoy it." "You don't." "Not unless I have to." They slipped down the slope, keeping low. A wagon rolled toward the rear entrance, crates stacked high. Without hesitation, Cain grabbed Celine's hand and pulled her alongside it. using the wagon as cover. The guard barely glanced their way. Inside the compound, noise swallowed them, hammering, shouting, metal striking stone. Cain guided her toward a wooden staircase at the side of the main office building. Halfway up, Celine paused. Footsteps, they flattened against the wall as a clerk descended, muttering to himself. Papers tucked under his arm, he passed without looking up. Once inside the second-floor office, Cain moved straight to a heavy oak cabinet. Locked, Celine stepped forward, pulling a thin metal tool from her boot. He raised an eyebrow. Didn't know bounty hunting required that. It requires results. Within seconds, the lock clicked open. Inside were stacks of contracts, stamped and signed. Celine scanned quickly. There, she whispered. Original leases. Expiration dates changed in newer copies. Cain found shipment logs. He rerouted food deliveries before eviction notices went out. Proof. Heavy boots thundered below. They've noticed something, Cain muttered. Celine stuffed key documents into her satchel. Then we leave. They slipped back into the stairwell, but 2 armed guards blocked the bottom. Up, Cain whispered. They climbed to the roof access ladder and emerged into harsh sunlight. Below, guards scattered, shouting orders. Jump to the next building, Cain said. You're insane. Only a little. He leaped first, landing on the lower roof across the narrow gap. Celine followed, boots skidding slightly, but holding firm. Gunfire erupted below. Move, Cain shouted. They raced across the rooftops, bullets splintering wood behind them. At the far edge, Cain spotted a hanging rope used to hoist supplies. He grabbed it, swung down to a stack of hay bales below, and rolled smoothly. Celine took a breath and jumped. She hit the hay hard, but uninjured. Workers screamed as chaos erupted. Cain grabbed her hand again, weaving through equipment and sprinting toward the rear exit. A rider charged toward them, revolver drawn. Celine spun, fired once. The rider dropped his weapon, clutching his arm. They reached their horses and mounted in one fluid motion. As they galloped away, dust rising behind them, Celine laughed breathlessly. You enjoy that, she accused. Cain grinned. Maybe a little. Once they reached the safety of the hills, they slowed. Celine pulled the documents from her satchel. This will ruin him, she said. Cain looked at her, not at the papers. You could still take me in, he said quietly. Collect your reward. She met his eyes steadily. The bounty on you isn't worth as much as the truth. Something unspoken passed between them, then stronger than partnership, stronger than law. But below, in the valley, smoke continued to rise from the mine, and men like Grayson did not fall quietly. Tomorrow, they would take the proof to Red Hollow. Tomorrow, everything would change. Red Hollow had never felt so tense. By the time Celine and Cain rode into town, word had already spread. Men paused mid-conversation. Saloon doors swung open and stayed that way. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Sheriff Dalton stepped out of his office as they dismounted. You've got nerve, he muttered, eyes flicking to Cain, bringing him here in broad daylight. Celine swung down from her saddle. We didn't come to hide. Cain stayed mounted, hands visible, but close to his holster. Not threatening, just ready. Dalton's gaze narrowed. You here to collect? Celine reached into her satchel and pulled out the stack of documents. No, I'm here to expose. Inside the sheriff's office, the air was thick and heavy. Celine spread the papers across Dalton's desk. Original land leases, shipment logs, forged eviction notices. Dalton adjusted his spectacles, scanning the dates. Leases altered, he muttered. Shipments delayed before notices issued. Cain stepped forward. Grayson's been starving families into selling. Dalton exhaled slowly. You understand what you're asking me to do? Grayson funds half this town, and he's bleeding the other half dry, Celine replied. A commotion outside interrupted them. Victor Hale's voice rang through the street. Sheriff, I demand custody of the outlaw. Celine and Cain stepped back into the sunlight together. Hale stood at the center of the street with 6 armed riders behind him. This man is wanted, Hale declared loudly, and anyone aiding him is obstructing justice. Celine stepped forward before Dalton could speak. Justice, she called, or profit. Hale's eyes burned. Careful. Celine held up the forged eviction notice. You altered legal documents. We have proof. Murmurs rippled through the watching townsfolk. Fail. Halved sharply. Forgery. That's a bold accusation. Sheriff Dalton emerged beside her, holding the original leases. It's also a true one, Dalton said, voice firm. Hale's confidence wavered for the first time. You think this town will turn on Mr. Grayson Hale? Snapped. He owns your livelihoods. A voice from the crowd answered. And what about ours? Widow Parker stepped forward, her 2 sons at her side. Behind her came other settlers' families. Cain had helped. You burned our crops, another man shouted. You cut our water lines. You threatened our children. The balance shifted. Hale reached slowly for his revolver. Cain's hand hovered near his own, but he didn't draw first. Celine did. One precise shot struck Hale's gun, sending it spinning into the dirt. Silence crashed down. Sheriff Dalton signaled his deputies. Victor Hale, you're under arrest for fraud, coercion, and attempted murder. Hale stared at the growing crowd, no longer afraid, no longer silent. This isn't over, he hissed, as he was disarmed. It is here, Dalton replied. The riders behind Hale backed down, lowering their weapons one by one. For the first time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow, Celine felt the town breathe. The bounty poster still hung outside the saloon, Cain's sketched face fluttering in the breeze. Dalton walked to it slowly. He tore it down. Cain watched quietly. You're clearing his name? Celine asked. Dalton nodded. Seems the only outlaw here wore a silk vest. A small smile tugged at Cain's mouth. Later, as the sun dipped low beyond the horizon, Celine stood at the edge of town beside her horse. You could stay, Cain said softly. With the settlers. With me. She looked at him. Really looked at him. I've spent years chasing bounties, she said. Never stopped to ask if the law was always right. And now, she stepped closer. Now, I know some hearts are worth more than any reward. Cain reached for her hand. Not hurried, not uncertain. The bounty on me still stands somewhere, he said lightly. She smiled. Then, I suppose I'll just have to keep chasing you. He laughed a free, unburdened sound. As the sky turned amber and gold, they mounted their horses and rode north, not as hunter and hunted, but as partners bound by something stronger than ink on a poster. Behind them, Red Hollow began to heal. Ahead of them, the west stretched wide and endless. And this time, Celine wasn't chasing a bounty. She was riding toward her heart. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.